Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts barks when Dawson knocks. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. And we're going to talk about Dawson Knox today because it is time to preview the AFC East. And for this division preview, I am joined for the first time in a minute by the one, the only Aaron Schatz. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back. It is good to be back here with Lenny. It's good to be talking about a division I know well. And it's good to be talking about the training camps and the preseason. And we made it through the offseason, man. We did it.
A division you know well, a division, I think you wrote one of the chapters, right? At least.
I did. I actually wrote a chapter in our almanac this year. I wrote the Jets. I didn't just do the numbers and the editing. I wrote a chapter.
I love that you chose the Jets, who are I'm actually excited to talk about. For those who don't know, Aaron and his team at FTN Fantasy put out what is now the FTN Fantasy Almanac every year, which is available to be purchased on Amazon, downloaded. It is absolutely indispensable if you're a football fan and you want to be smarter, or if you consume football for fantasy betting, everything. It is chock full of incredible nuggets. And I just cracked open to see what you had written and to read your chapter. It is as useful as ever. So please go check that out. It is truly an incredible resource for fans, including fans of the AFC East. I really enjoyed your Jets chapter. I'm excited to talk about the Jets. Let's not start with them, though. Let's start with the Patriots, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure. Let's start with the local boys.
A lot of buzz around these New England Patriots this year. I was looking at like Coach of the Year odds, betting odds, and they are kind of, I feel like the team with the momentum. Patriots and Bears kind of feels like, the turnaround team. They have a lot of juice. And after thinking through sort of the state of New England and looking at the depth chart, I do share some of that enthusiasm. We can start with the offense. It really all, of course, begins with the promising rookie season of Drake May, despite playing in what I believe was the worst situation in football last year. The Patriots have, of course, taken efforts to rectify that situation. The offensive line looks very different. Now you have Will Campbell, their 4th overall draft pick at left tackle, Morgan Moses, who's a just quality vet on the right side. So on the inside, you have Cole Strange, Garrett Bradbury at center, Michael Nwenu, who's like the only good player last year. And then the receiving group looks a little bit different. It's confusing, and I'm excited to discuss it with you. But you have Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins / Kayshon Boutte as the X, Demario Douglas, who's really probably the best player last year at slot, backed by Kyle Williams, who's a receiver they drafted this year, Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry and Austin Cooper remain at tight end, and then a back, Ramondre Stevenson, is now joined by Travion Henderson and Antonio Gibson. So let's start by taking a kind of 30,000-foot view. How do you regard the improvements that they've made? Like, do you look at this depth chart when you took a step back and looked at this depth chart, and of course Josh McDaniels is calling the plays, which we'll talk about. Did you feel markedly better than you did at the end of last season?
With the offensive line, you have to. I think a lot with the Patriots on both sides of the ball, there's a lot of, we think that something is true, but we don't know that something is true. So my subjective hopes as a Patriots fan, and I'm honest about this, I live in Worcester, Massachusetts, I'm a Patriots fan. My subjective hopes are different from my objective projections. We think that Stephon Diggs is still a number 1 receiver and will be healthy, but we don't know he will be. We think that Kyle Williams might be better than the average 3rd-round pick at wide receiver, but we don't know he will be. Will Campbell, same thing. Bradbury, I don't even know. I mean, they've got Jacob Wilson, who they took out of Georgia in the 3rd round. He could win the center job.
Yeah, that would be...
I mean, I think they would like him to, because, I mean, Bradbury is not very highly rated. If it turns out this 3rd-round rookie is good enough to win the job as a rookie, I think they'll be pretty happy.
Bradbury, better run blocker than pass protector for sure. Yes. The offensive line is truly where you're like really Will Campbell. I liked Will Campbell. I think he's a good pass protector. I think he's pretty polished. But, there's size issues, measurables that led to some questions about whether he'd even be the first tackle taken overall. There's a lot of projection to kind of sum up what you just said.
Yeah.
Diggs is an interesting one for me. Let's start with the receiving group a little bit, because on one hand, I thought he was really good last year before he got hurt, and it was kind of being slept on how good he was, primarily in the slot for Houston, which I don't think is a role he's going to play in New England. So there's projection there, right? I mean, that's obviously he's played outside throughout most of his career, but if you're going to look to last year, Stephon Diggs, those first 7 or 8 games before he got injured, in which, by the way, I think he either led or was second in the NFL in first downs at that point. Incredibly reliable, working the slot, super, as ever, polished route runner, good hands, paired so well with Nico Collins. Cool. There's no Nico Collins on the Patriots. They're going to need him to play outside, I think mostly as like a Z role. And he's coming off of the ACL, and he's on the wrong side of 30. So on one hand, like I liked that signing. I think if he's anything like he was last year, makes perfect sense, pairs well with the other receivers in the roster. But on the other hand, projection. We don't really know. We're going to have to see it.
It's a lot of the Patriots also have a lot of things like this. It's a shot they had to take that may not work as well as they want it to, but it's a shot they had to take. This was a shot, right? They tried to get Chris Godwin. That didn't happen. People talked here about trading for T. Higgins. The Bengals were not going to let that happen. They needed a number 1 receiver. They had to take a shot at one. This is the one they could get. And he was good last year. I mean, 2 years ago, we went into last season with this whole, what was wrong with Diggs in 2023? Was it an injury, or did he fall off in the second half of the year because of age? I think he showed last year it was very likely an injury, except now he's coming off another injury.
So, yeah, and at his age, when the injuries start compiling, it can be a problem. But again, they don't need him to be 2018, 19 Stephon Diggs.
Right, they just need him to be better than what they had last year.
Yeah. Douglas is a good slot. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. I think he's a good player. Williams is a player I'm excited about. He offers a vertical element that is otherwise kind of absent on this roster, right? And you have a quarterback who has a big arm in Drake May. So that's interesting to me. Hollins, Booty, they're fine. They could play.
I will say they still have Kendrick Bourne.
Yep.
And who always did really, really well in the ESPN receiver tracking metrics. He's kind of a little bit of an underrated player, assuming he's still got it. But you don't really know, other than Diggs is the number 1, you don't really know what order these guys come in. There's also Jalen Polk. As bad as Jalen Polk was last year, and he was about as bad as you can imagine a rookie receiver being, it still was only 1 year. The local reporters that I've talked to feel very much that Polk's problem last year was mental. And so you feel like if he can start over this year and the coaching is a lot better, maybe they see something out of him. This is a guy who was a second-round pick from a very good college offense.
He was good in college. I liked the pick. That was like an L for me. The player I saw in the NFL looked so different from the one, I'm a Huskies fan, I saw in college. So it would be amazing if he was able to turn things around. And the coaching will be better, right? So let's talk about Josh McDaniels. There are things that he is unequivocally good at that I do think you can extricate from Tom Brady, because we got to see him work with different quarterbacks, one of whom I'm going to talk about when we talk about Drake May. He calls what I would describe as like a coherent offense. Everything makes sense. The plays feed into one another. The pass and the run work together. He's a very good play action play caller. He doesn't just ask his receivers to go win against man coverage, which is something the Patriots faced a lot of last year. He finds ways to spring them open. He's always been historically very good at. His trademark is kind of the, under center downhill run game. You're play actioning off of that. The receivers are running option routes. It does put a lot on the quarterback's plate. But Aaron, I do think it's likely we see improvement, both quarterback and skill players, just by virtue of having, like a very proven, established play caller in the fold.
Alex Van Pelt's offense was very beige. It was there. There was nothing really exciting about it other than May's arm. The Patriots last year, by the FTN data charting, 31st in play action, 27th in using motion. All that exciting stuff that we know now makes offenses go, none of that. It didn't do any of that. So, like, that change in and of itself, plus, like you said, we've seen McDaniels with other people other than Tom Brady. We know that he can adapt his offense to other quarterbacks. Yeah, he had that one bad year with the Rams, but what he was able to do with Mac Jones is impressive.
Or the Raiders, you mean?
Well, he was Mac Jones, I think, the first year.
Oh, yeah,
That
you're
Mac
thinking.
Jones was with the Patriots, and then McDaniels left for the Raiders, and
Yeah,
Mac Jones fell off completely.
Yeah. I think in retrospect, you kind of got to give him more credit for Mac Jones, seeing what happened with Mac Jones, and what's happened with him since then. You mentioned the other quarterbacks he's worked with, and something I wanted to bring up here, and we can talk about Drake May now and what he flashed his rookie season, is how good Josh McDaniels was at scheming up a design run game for Cam Newton. So last year, Drake May, despite not starting for much of the season, was incredibly prolific as a scrambler, almost exclusively scrambles. There was not much of a design QB run game, but he finished first in yards per carry, third in success rate, sixth in rushing DVOA amongst quarterbacks. Josh McDaniels with Cam Newton in 2020 went back and looked. So that year, Cam Newton was third in rushing yards, lest people forget, and third in rushing success rate. He wasn't terribly explosive at that point in his career, but you as a Patriots fan, I vividly remember watching that design quarterback run, a lot of the QB power they were running, the optioning off of that, and thinking makes sense. And we have a play caller who's spent his entire career calling plays for Tom Brady, who has shown the willingness to adjust. The Patriots run game also flowing off of that was quite good that season. So that's the narrative that I'm excited about. Before we even get to the dropback game, I'm excited to see what Josh McDaniels does with Drake May as a runner, because he has a proven track record of doing it quite well.
Yes, and the quarterback run game opens things up for running backs. There's no question. When you have a quarterback run game, you freeze the defense. They don't know if the quarterback's keeping the ball. They've got to prepare for the quarterback to keep the ball. It opens up lanes for the running backs. It's statistically provable.
And how do you feel about the running backs?
I mean, they're there. I'm not somebody who gets excited about taking a running back in the second round, especially this year when there were so many good running backs in this draft, where you could have gotten a guy in the fourth or the fifth who I think would have been fine. I mean, Henderson is good, talented guy. He's exciting. And you know that archetype is an archetype that has been a really big thing here for a long time. Kevin Falk and James White and now Travion Henderson, it fits. Stevenson is a guy, right? Like, he's a running back who's fine, but he doesn't really move the needle, but he doesn't move the needle in a bad way either. Yeah, he had some fumble problems, but whatever. It doesn't really move the needle in a bad or a good way. I'm more excited about the design of the running game than I am about the running backs themselves.
Henderson, I really love watching him in college. He is, I hear you on the drafting position, and I think that unfortunately there's weren't a lot of, the fact they were able to, let me put it this way. The fact they were able to get Henderson and Kyle Williams made me feel a lot better about the Henderson pick, right? Because
that's
like,
valid.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
They came out of this with like an explosive receiver, which they needed. And there weren't also many receivers around then that I was like, they got to get this guy. And I can't believe they passed on him. Henderson is explosive. He, it'll be interesting to see how much run he gets, so to speak. Like, does he get that kind of Jahmyr Gibbs rookie workload where they don't really use him on early downs as much, perhaps, as one might hope. But then as he proves himself and he can run between the tackles, they start working him in more and more. Maybe if the line depends on how the line blocks. But he is a really exciting player. He can catch passes. I think he can pass protect. So I do like that they added him to the offense. I think he gives May an outlet too in the passing game. And I just to go back to the passing game, I mean, I am quite optimistic about Drake May. And I want to ask you before we move on to the defense, do you think we need to pump the brakes at all? Because I feel like there's so much excitement around May, and people have done a really good job of contextualizing his performance. Like, oh, he did so good in spite of this, which is accurate and fair. Do you feel like there's, cause for caution after his rookie season? Like, what did you see in him that made you excited? What did you see that gives you pause?
I mean, he has his struggles with certain things. He was poor against the blitz, but a lot of things with May, you don't know, is he poor against the blitz or was it the offensive line poor against the blitz, right? Like, I think people understand that he still may be a little bit hamstrung by the situation around him, and you don't necessarily expect him to be like a top 5 guy this year. If you have that understanding, then I don't think you need to pump the brakes. He is really excited. His first start, there was a deep pass to Booty on the right side of the end zone. And I attend Patriots games, and everyone in the press box just looked at each other like, okay, well, the search for a quarterback is over. Like one pass, and it was just like, oh, this is the guy. Like that talent is, and plus the running talent and stuff, that talent and stuff is all so clearly there that you have to get excited about it. But I don't know if the surrounding situation is as upgraded as we think it is.
Yeah, I think that's the question. It's like, okay, we think he has the ability to make the leap, but are the pieces in place for him to make the leap? That's kind of what has to be borne out. I mean, I know exactly the throw you're thinking of. There were just so many plays, both inside and outside of structure. I would say mostly outside of structure. But again, yeah, everything's outside of structure when your offensive line is literally just collapsing on every play. So it's like, I wasn't watching him saying, dude, just stand in there. And there were a couple of times where I thought, okay, you could actually stay in the pocket here, but you don't begrudge him watching. And then under pressure, he was excellent. 11th in QBR, 4th in completion percentage over expected, 1st in on target rate. And we nerds know that, play kept clean, quarterback play under kept clean tends to be more stable year to year, but the caveats are necessary. This dude was just under pressure constantly. He was under quick pressure constantly. And when he did a lot of really good things, made a lot of plays. I was really impressed by him. The Bills game comes to mind, was like one where I just remember watching him thinking, oh my God, like this is happening, right? Like, he is living up to the promise of what we thought. I am optimistic. I think for me, it's just a matter of degree. Like, okay, if the circumstances around him are, instead of being a D, if they're like a C plus, how much could that hold him back? Versus if they're a B, okay. And I think it comes down to, a lot of it is going to come down to the play of Will Campbell. If I had to pick one player who I'm like, the whole thing could kind of swing on this. I think Diggs is really important in this offense, which is a scary thing to say after our conversation earlier, but I'm excited, Aaron. Like he was one of my favorite stories of 2024. And I think if you're a Patriots fan, you should be pretty stoked about what you've seen thus far.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the talent is there. I think if he's above average, you've got to say to yourself, all right, we're moving, man. Like this is the improvement we want to see. Next year, we take another step. And I don't think he needs to be top 5 or so. He doesn't need to be what Jaden Daniels was last year for us all to go, this is a really talented guy. They've got their guy. They're growing for the future.
Well, he will also be helped a lot by the improvement in the Patriot defense, which was incredibly injured last season. I think somehow gets a little bit lost, but is also a unit that they invested very heavily in free agency. We've talked about that a lot on this pod. And of course, you have a new coaching staff. I want to start there because Mike Vrabel coming in, and then I think Terrell Williams is the defensive coordinator, who's with Detroit, and so it's going to look a little different. I asked, because Vrabel typically is run 4-3, and again, it's these days it's all kind of mushed together. But I asked Taylor Kyles, who does a terrific job covering the Patriots, what he is seeing at practice. And he said very much so with Barmore playing like the Jeffrey Simmons role in Tennessee. That's exciting. I mean, I've said this, Aaron, but Christian Barmore and Milton Williams, and we'll see how they use Keon White. Like, this has a potential to be a very, very strong group of defensive tackles.
Yes. I mean, Milton Williams, we're all like, wow, what is he going to do without Jalen Carter? But we all feel like he's a good, talented guy. They gave him all that money for a reason. And there's an interesting edge rush rotation. Clavion Chason, for example, who like did nothing in Jacksonville, like finally really came out of his shell last year for the Raiders and had a bunch of sacks at the end of the season. And he's like the third or fourth edge rusher for this team. So there's no question, like the draft was like offense and the free agent signings were very heavily defense. They've brought in a lot of veterans to move this up. Now, the one thing I will say about Vrabel, and we talk about this in the book, the Tennessee defenses were never great. They were mostly like 17th. He had 1 year where his defense ranked 10th in DVOA and one where they were really bad. And then for the most part, they were just really average. So I don't think, like for all the things that we think Vrabel does well, good manager of the locker room and good in-game decision maker, stuff like that, he never had a history of managing great defenses as a defensive-oriented head coach.
Generally better against the run,
yes,
than the pass, which I guess, it kind of makes sense, Vrabel being linebacker. And I think that's what we're going to see. Like looking at this group, I think we're going to see a real significant improvement against the run because even the players they brought in, the vets, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, even if you're not really raising the ceiling of this defense, like they're not stars, they are solid against the run to the point where I think you see the floor come up, and that hopefully helps them. And they have studs and cornerback and defensive tackle, I think, to take advantage of that, perhaps against the pass. This was a defense that was awful last year. 29th versus pass, 28th versus the run DVOA. I think there are still some question marks. Edge is a question. Safety. See if Kyle Duggar can make a rebound.
Yeah.
They seem to think so. But I think my general feeling is while I don't look at this defense and I'm not like, they're still missing kind of that edge rusher and what maybe they're not a top 10 unit like they were for so long during Belichick. It's hard for me to imagine them not rising to at minimum average. Do you feel that way?
I think that they could definitely be average. Yeah. I mean, there are certain weaknesses. The other one I'd say is slot nickel. Marcus Jones is nice, but he's never been like, we've really seen Marcus Jones stop guys. And if you're Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis, who are you attacking? You're attacking Marcus Jones. But yeah, this defense can absolutely be average. I mean, in a way, that's sort of, I mean, the ceiling for this team is higher than that, but the sort of dream is if they could put an average defense and a slightly above average offense on the field, they have an easy schedule this year. All right, we're going wild card hunting. Great.
Yeah,
and then everything's set to take the step into real contention in 2026. I mean, the ceiling is honestly higher than that with May. But one thing I've said is I feel like if the Bills falter and Allen gets injured, the Patriots are more likely to win the division, I think, than the other two teams. Even though I think they have a lower floor than the Dolphins do. I think there's a wide variety of possibilities with this team, a wide range. I'm not getting forward with myself. Talking about the Patriots here. Wide range of possibilities from the low to the high.
We're going to hit 1 through 4 at the end. So I like to I don't rank them beforehand. I like to have this conversation and then my brain is kind of spinning and thinking about it. And then at the end, I'll tell you what I think. But yeah, I think you're right about the wide range of possibilities. So I think to sum it up for me, what would it take for the Patriots to not just be average, but be a good team? Because I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. I think this is a team that I look at this roster, I look at the changes, I look at the coaching changes, I look at everything we talked about, and I see an average team with a few stars, a very promising young quarterback. To me, what would it take for them to be above average, to be competitive at the end of the year, as you talked about, against the easy schedule? Campbell has to play well. He can't be a disaster because the tackle depth is obviously terrible. I never want to see the guy that they
for Darian Lowe. You never want to see for Darian Lowe again.
I think Stephon Diggs, one of Stephon Diggs or Kyle Williams, has to be a useful player. I'm not even saying a star, a useful player. Defensively, that tackle duo has to be as good as I think they are, Barmore and Williams. And then I've Davis and Gonzalez on the outside, I'm not even worried about. So, but with Williams, like you said, no longer playing with Carter, Barmore coming back up from the off year. If those guys can sustain/return to form, you have a star group on the defense. You have 2 star position groups. You have star DTs and you have star corners. That's good. So I think if all those things happen, which is very realistic, this could be a good team versus an average team.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, the numerical projections are a little bit lower than the consensus, like the Vegas odds, but the promise is there. And the other thing is, look, I'm the numbers guy. I do these numerical projections in our book. The numerical projections don't know how bad Mayo was and how out of his depth he was last year. There's no variable for that because it's not. I mean, he was more out of his depth than most coaches that you can think of have ever been. So just like, even if Vrabel is not as good a coach as a lot of people think he is, just the move from Mayo to average is a big coaching change. And I'm not talking about defense. I'm talking about just management of the team.
Oh, yeah. Game management, too. Yeah. I mean, that's the pretty dramatic shift. Okay, new coaching staff also in New York, and one that I'm also optimistic about. I think both of these teams upgraded coaching. Is obviously Aaron Glenn's a little bit more of a question mark because he is a first-time head coach, but I'm excited to watch this team, this Jets team. I'm really intrigued because I think that the coaching overhaul brings with it a lot of schematic changes, and I don't quite know how they're going to play out. So this is the team that, Aaron, you recapped, you said, in the FTN Almanac. So I'm really excited to talk about this with you. So let's start with the offense. Justin Fields is now the quarterback. Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Josh Reynolds, Mason Taylor is the tight end they drafted, Jeremy Ruckert, Breece Hall, Braylon Allen. Offensive line, they drafted Armand Membu, bringing Josh Myers as competition for center. The offensive coordinator is Tanner Engstrand, who comes from the Lions. So when we think about the Lions, we think under center, play action, attacking the middle of the field, outside zone run game. So my question for you is this. Does that make sense for Justin Fields? Right? Like, nope. Like at all? Like, do parts of it make sense? Does some of it make sense? Like, what do you think is the ideal offense for Fields at this point in his career with this particular group around him?
I think he's more of a boundary thrower than a middle thrower. I think he's more of a shotgun guy. I think you want to make sure you have designed runs for him. It's very different than what the offense that you would design for Jared Goff. And it seems like a really strange marriage of the coordinator with the quarterback. And even, I mean, Garrett Wilson can catch passes everywhere, but he seems like more of a boundary guy. Like, it just seems like a really weird, or maybe Engstrand does something completely different. Maybe he's like Josh McDaniels, different quarterback, different offense. He's not bringing the offense from Detroit, but we don't know. We have no idea whether, like, is he going to come up with something just completely new because he's got all kinds of tricks in his magic bag, or is he going to run Ben Johnson's offense from last year, which seems totally wrong for this quarterback?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more from camp because I think that's gonna really inform how I feel about this team. Engstrand, I was looking at just to see if he's talked about it. He has spoken about the importance of Fields as a dual threat quarterback and leaning into his rushing ability. Cool. What does it look like? Like that. I could, because I think when we talk about upside cases, you could hypothetically see some pretty serious improvement in the run game. The Jets were horrible at running the ball last year. They did not run the ball, right? Like, they just didn't want to. There's a litany of reasons for that. But when I look at this group, ESPN has them very low in run block win. They were 17th in adjusted line yards. I actually think this could be a good run blocking offensive line as is right now. Fashanu, John Simpson, Tippmann versus Josh Myers at center. I mentioned that. And then AVT and then Membu, who I think is a good run blocker. And again, we cannot understate, I think, the advantage of having Fields back there and what that could do for this run game. Breece Hall, another year removed from his injury. Braylon Allen. But the design of it, I think, is going to be paramount to unlocking it. He can't try to graft the Lions offense onto this group. They're just too different. The quarterback is too different. So I really think that the play call, this is like one of the more intriguing and maybe important offensive coordinator changes in the NFL, because it's a little it's a little bit of a square peg round hole situation.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I have to say this too. I am not a Fields believer.
Okay.
Right? Like
you're not even holding a little shred of hope. You're out.
The running is great. Last year was this breakout for him in which he was a little bit below average in a 6-game sample. When you compare that to the rest of his career, the amount of knowledge we have about the rest of his career, I think overwhelms what we learned in 6 games or whatever it was last year. And it's just very unlikely that he's suddenly going to become an above average passer. He is a really good example of one of the reasons why statistical analysis works, which is that our memories as human beings remember highlights. But you have to measure all the run-of-the-mill plays that come in between the highlights, because the highlights with him are awesome. But all the run-of-the-mill plays for 4 years have been meh, have just been not good. I mean, last year they were meh, and before that they were worse than meh. So I'm just not a believer that even a new offense and a new offensive coordinator, and even having Garrett Wilson and all that, is going to bring Fields and suddenly make him a good quarterback. I just don't. I mean, I wanted to believe it when he came into the league, man. I was all ready for him to be a star. It's just not happening.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if you're not skeptical, you're delusional. I think there are varying grades of skepticism. I'd say the optimist in me holds out hope that this can be a dynamic running game with some explosivity through the air, even if it's not a efficient or elite offense. But, I'm not, at this point, holding on to all my Justin Fields stock thinking it's going to hit, right? Or my lottery ticket. I think for the Jets, success would be a good run game, your young players shining, and feeling good about the coaching staff and the play calling and the decisions that they make, and competence. I don't think success means having a top 10 offense. Be realistic. You signed Garrett Wilson. By the way, there's a lot of Ohio State guys. Josh Myers was Justin Fields' center at Ohio State. You know that? You got Garrett Wilson, of course. I actually like the Josh Reynolds signing was kind of sneaky interesting to me with the Detroit reunion.
He had that one good year.
Yeah, he had that one good year. But
yeah.
Him and Alan Lazard can actually block. And I think so you could kind of lean into to me, this needs to be like a physical run first offense. And if they can do that, I think they can at least be interesting and fun to watch. Defensively, another interesting schematic debate, I would say. I also want to say I did like Mason Taylor, the tight end that they drafted out of LSU.
Yep, I think that's a good improvement. We'll say the one thing is all of his backups can't block. There's no blocking tight end.
Oh my God, dude.
Ruckert can't block. Stone Smart is not a blocker. These are not blockers.
It's not even that their tight ends couldn't block last year. They were some of the worst blocking tight ends I've ever seen in the NFL. I cannot even stress. I don't know who was I watching Breece Hall, or I think it was when I was watching a little bit of Aaron Rodgers around the Steelers signing, and there were so many reps where tight ends were just whiffing on blocks that were truly astounding stuff.
Andrew Beck, so they have a fullback now. Yeah. But they do not really have a blocking. If they want to be a run-first offense, there is not really a blocking tight end here.
So the Jets' defense is interesting because I think in my head, I thought a lot of still really good players, things just kind of fell apart last year. I want to blame coaching. You take the defensive coordinator, you promote him. The defense is sick of the offense being bad. But then when I looked at the depth chart, Aaron, I was actually surprised by the number of holes on this defense. You still have really good players. Obviously, Quinnen Williams is a star. Jamian Sherwood emerged last year. Sauce Gardner, however much he struggled in tackling, is still a good cover corner who they rewarded, of course, with the contract extension. Will McDonald broke out too. But defensive tackle outside of Quinnen, edge depth with Jermaine Johnson coming off of the injury, safety corner opposite Gardner, A lot of question marks on this defense. Was that your experience as well when you were writing this chapter? And how did you feel about this group?
Yeah, listen, Brandon Stevens was the hole in Baltimore last year, right? Like I'm sorry to slag the guy, and I talk all the time about cornerback performance is very inconsistent, no matter how much you measure it. Just look at Gardner last year, but Stevens was pretty bad last year, and they're really depending on him now because if you're an opponent, you're avoiding Sauce, you're going after Stevens.
Yeah, that was pretty much the game plan every week against the Ravens. I did like they drafted the FSU corner. I was just looking at I wish I looked up a name pronouncer on him because this is something.
Azarie Thomas, I guess.
Thomas.
I don't know what the apostrophe does in there, but Azarie Thomas.
Azarie, it's right before the H. Big physical corner, very good fit. I was gonna say for Aaron Glenn's scheme, but that brings me to the next thing, which is schematically, I'm actually not sure what this is gonna look like either. So we talked about that on the offense with Tanner Engstrand. So Aaron Glenn is the head coach, but Steve Wilks is defensive coordinator. Super experienced, successful coach. Which is to say, it's not just like some young name that he's bringing in there while, he's taking over the defense. Those guys call pretty different defenses, right?
Yep.
Like, so Aaron Glenn, even obviously his tendencies were exacerbated by the injury situation in Detroit, but historically, a lot of man coverage. Steve Wilks, very zone heavy. So this is another one where I'm looking at this and I'm wondering, I think they're going to blitz a fair amount, especially with the lack of pass rushers, but I actually don't know what this is going to look like on the back end with these guys. It's another one where I'm like, I got to see this play out to understand schematically what they're going to run.
Nope. And Gardner, you would think Gardner's the kind of guy you want to live on an island, and that would point to man. And you would think that Stevens is not, and that would point to zone. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I will say Michael Carter 2 years ago was a very good nickel, and then he was injured a lot last year. So that might be, an improvement by having Michael Carter back for as far as the defensive backs go.
Brandon Stevens on an island, just the amount of times he was getting beat and at his just downfield on the left sideline versus Baltimore. It's not what you want. It would be great if Thomas was able to emerge and take that job. I'll say that. I think he was second round is when they took him. Third round. Okay. Still a good linebacking group. I mentioned Sherwood. Williams, a little bit of a down year, but I think he can bounce back. Safety is interesting too. By the way, they added Malachi Moore. I thought that was an interesting draft pick as a college player that I did like. And Andre Sisco, who's been at least competent in Jacksonville to play with Tony. Safety has been kind of like a thorn in their side now for a few years. But but again, okay, so this is a defense that ended up 21st versus the pass and 20th versus the run. I do think that there is a world which we can see some pretty significant improvement because of coaching. But I think I went into this thinking like, oh, sure, they could absolutely return to being a top 10 defense. And after looking at the depth chart, I was like, oh, I don't know about that. A lot of things would have to go right for this unit.
I'll also say this about coaching, which is that oftentimes head coaches take over and their side of the ball does not necessarily improve. Because all of a sudden they have all the responsibilities of a head coach and they're not necessarily designing the scheme. And, Tony Dungy's teams were always better on offense than defense. So I don't know, just because Aaron Glenn is the head coach, does that mean the defense takes a big step forward? Because, he designed some of it, but Wilks designed some of it, and Glenn has all these other responsibilities now. And I don't know we can say for sure that the defense is going to improve.
Wilks is a good coach. I think that.
Yeah.
I suspect Glenn is going to be comfortable giving him a lot of responsibility and leeway. And I think the question will be, okay, but if they struggle, then do we see a war of philosophies or him stepping in? One thing I do think they're going to be better at is not having so many penalties. You mentioned this in your chapter. They led the league with 72 defensive penalties last year, including declined and offsetting ones. I do not see that happening again this season. That, to me, felt like bad coaching last year and like a lack of discipline.
Yeah, although it's funny. We tend to think of penalties as being a discipline thing and being coaching related, but there are plenty of teams with good coaches who end up having a lot of penalties anyway.
All right, let's take a quick break and come back to talk about the big bad in the division, the Buffalo Bills. We are back. I feel like big bad makes it sound like they're the villain. They're not the villain. They're just the overwhelming favorite again. The big kahuna, the big cheese, the boss. Can anyone come at the Bills and take them down? I don't think so. We're going to talk about that at the end. This is a very good football team, Aaron, and doing this exercise only reinforced my belief that this is a very good roster. Offensively, not a lot of change here. This is something that Brandon Beane talked about when he was asked about the receiving group. But you're still looking at, it's the same group, only you've added Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore. Offensive line, which was remarkably healthy last year and consistent, remains the same. Assuming James Cook, there's no contract stuff, same running back group, pretty much the same. And yeah, why would you mess with something that wasn't broken, I guess is where I would start with this offense.
Yeah, unless you could go out and get some star receiver. I mean, listen, Brandon Beane really takes exception when you say the weakness of this team is the receivers. But guess what? Every team has a weak. No team is perfect. Relatively, something on your team is the weakness. And it just so happens, like, yeah, are the Bills really successful despite the fact that this is their weakness? Absolutely. But what's their weakness? It's got to be something, and this is what it is. And Keon Coleman, there are a lot of people who feel like, you know, if you chart Keon Coleman's performance, that it doesn't look that great for his first year. And, I mean, he did fine in our stats, but people who like chart and like do more of a scouting look at things are not big fans of what Keon Coleman did. We like Shakir and we like Kincaid and Dawson Knox and yeah, I'm not big a Curtis Samuel guy, but that's the weakness. But the quarterback covers a lot of. I mean, the quarterback and the offensive line cover a lot of problems because they're both really, really good.
Really good. The backs are good. It's a good group of backs too. You remember it was the Jets game where Ray Davis went crazy. Like
Ty Johnson.
Yeah, Ty Johnson.
Good guy.
Like James Cook. All of the backs were good in advanced metrics, and the offensive line was astoundingly good. I think the only concern I would have is if there was an injury, right, to the offensive line, of course, but that you can say that about like literally every team. The group of receivers. I was asked about this on NFL Live, like, ooh, what do the Bills need to get over the hump? And the defense is the issue, and we're going to talk about the defense. The offense was amazing. But I made this point, and I stand by it. Like, they need someone who's better at beating man coverage. This is a team that faces a ton of man coverage. And I pulled this because I was curious. Both Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman, who are potentially, I think, your problem guys, had a sub 50% catch rate versus man last year. Shakir had a very low average depth of target. They were using him mostly on underneath stuff last season. I feel like when we're thinking about like what's the difference here, what could it take, what do we need, that has to change. Like one of those guys has to be more reliable against man coverage. I really feel that way. Has to is strong because everything can be exactly the same, and this is still going to be one of the best 3 or 4 offenses.
But you feel like to win the playoff games, that would be the most important change to win playoff games.
Especially
like that,
the Kansas City Chiefs in particular, right?
Yes.
A team that loves to play. Yeah. I mean, do we even have to talk about Josh Allen?
He's awesome.
What's to talk about? He was incredible last year.
He says hi from my shelf. There we go.
Yeah, a little Josh Allen bobblehead.
I have a little Josh Allen on my shelf.
I mean, he was an animal. He's good at everything. He was careful with the football. He was. I think the only thing is just like, sometimes it's like, okay, where's the deep passing game coming from? But that's not a Josh Allen question, of course. There's nothing that seems primed for regression when you look through his statistical profile. He's gotten better at every aspect of playing the quarterback position. To me, I think when I look at this offense and I ask, like, what could stop this from once again being an elite offensive group? Offensive line injuries like Dawkins or one of this, that's really the only thing that worries me. The thing about having no number one receiver is you don't need, you can't afford to lose any of them.
Right. There's no one receiver who, Josh Palmer is hurt. Aren't we in trouble now? Right. There's not like that.
Palmer's a good player. He's a good route runner. He's reliable, but it's kind of, he doesn't move the needle for me on this offense. The other thing I'd be worried about is they're losing their coordinator, but they kept him this year. So again, continuity. Offense.
Yes, and he is. You talked about this on another show. He's a really big head coaching candidate for the future, I think.
100%. Okay, the defense is, I'm more interested in talking about, because I think when we think about this team getting over the hump and going to the Super Bowl, this is the side of the ball you want to see improve. The team clearly felt that way with their approach to particularly the draft, where they just went ham on the defensive line. And for good reason. This was an average pass defense that was really aided by turnovers last year. You could talk about that. I know you guys always look at that when you look for signs of regression. But the pass rush, they're good against the run. They're always good against the run. I just think the pass rush wasn't good enough. So you go out and you're adding TJ Sanders, who was their second-round draft pick, who's kind of like a 3-tech/1 tech out of South Carolina, Deon Walker, Landon Jackson, and then you sign Joey Bosa to give you some veteran edge help, as well as Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi, who are suspended. I like this approach. I think this was smart. I think you just got to keep throwing resources at this defensive line and hoping it hits, because we'll talk about the corner room, which is obviously the first round draft pick, but when I think about this defense and some of the issues last year and some of the games where they were getting pushed around a little bit, I do think about that defensive line, Aaron.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Ed Oliver is a good player. Daquan Jones is a good player. They added Larry Ogunjobi. I mean, they did work. They said, look, we need to do work on this part of the team. Let's do work. It also will help pass the defensive line if Milano can actually stay healthy for a whole year, right? Because he's, very good if he can stay healthy. But no, you're absolutely right. This is what they looked at. This is what you hope that Bosa is a big improvement. Hoyt's my boy, but he's not that meaningful. Obviously, they want the defense to be better and less dependent on turnovers. And if the turnovers come, then Yahtzee.
I don't think people understood how much they struggled on third down last year. I talked about this a little bit after the Hairston edition, like why focus on pass defense so much. The Bills' defense was 30th in EPA per play and 29th in success rate on third down.
27th in DVOA, yep.
And then when you expand that to third and long, it looks even worse. So, drafting Hairston, obviously the second cornerback position was a major problem, particularly in the postseason. You saw that. And focusing on the defensive line, like they were very acutely aware that this was a flaw on the team that was papered over a little bit by some of the turnovers that they were getting.
Yes, I agree. I am going to say Hairston's off the field issues give me a little bit of heebie-jeebies. Like, I don't quite know what's the situation there.
Yeah, but I really quickly, I want to address that because I didn't address that at all during the draft because I had no idea. But it came out recently that he was accused of sexual assault. This was a case dating back to his freshman year of college. The women reported it back then. The Bills, there was a Title IX hearing that resulted in no action taken by the university, and Brandon Beane said they did a lot of research and defended the decision. But that was something that came to light recently because she filed, I believe, a civil suit.
Yeah,
I completely missed this entire story, so I just want to address that too. Sorry.
And I don't know. I mean, it doesn't sound good. I will also point out, to completely switch ideas, Christian Benford is really good. I feel he is one of the most underrated players in the league. I actually put him on my Defensive Player of the Year ballot last year. At
really?
Number 5. He was my number 5 guy. I think he had a phenomenal season.
NFL 100? I know it's the NFL 100.
Make the NFL 100, right. Yeah, like what?
We don't have to engage with that list. He's really good. How do you feel about Taron Johnson?
He's good. I guess I'm not as excited by him as Bills fans feel like he's like a top nickel. I don't think he's like a top nickel. I don't think he's Trent McDuffie, I mean, I guess Trent McDuffie played a lot more on the outside last year, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't think he's like a top nickel, but he's a pretty good player.
I mean, that's kind of the thing with the Bills defense generally is like, it's a lot of pretty good.
Yeah, there's nobody who you're like, oh, that's, I mean, the closest thing they have is Benford. And then Milano
when he's healthy. Yeah. Like Ed Oliver, Rousseau, they're really good. But when it's 3rd and long and you're facing Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship, who's going to be great for this team? You know,
right. Ed Oliver is good, but he's not Chris Jones.
Yeah.
And Rousseau is good, but he's not George Karlaftis.
I think for me to feel good about this team, this defense rather, going from being what I believe was like basically average to flirting with top 10, would really like to see one of those young defensive linemen make a contribution, and then addressing the other cornerback position. Running it back at safety with Rapp, Bishop, Hamlin as depth, fine. It's good. They're well coached. And I will say, I think part of the reason they do get a lot of turnovers is this is a very zone-heavy defense. You have players who could play the ball. So while turnovers are always a sign for regression, there are aspects structurally of this defense, I think, that make me think they can still turn quarterbacks over, coupled with the fact that they have a quarterback on the other side, or their own team, who's an absolute animal and can allow them to play from ahead. You know what I mean? So, I get it. Sorry?
If you combine both sides of the ball, they had the best fumble recovery rate in the league last year, which is something that tends to regress. But it wasn't crazy. It was like 62%. It wasn't like 75%. That's absolutely going to regress. Like, it's not ridiculous to think they might have a lot of turnovers this year too.
I agree. I think what I'll just, to put a wrap, to put a pin on the Bills, their approach to this offseason makes a lot of sense to me. They, I think, made draft picks in the right areas. They didn't have a lot of money to spend. You know, like, they spent too much on Van Miller. Joey Bosa is a much more reasonable contract, for example. I think they added some veteran depth at receiver. Do I wish they had a little more speed? Yeah. Do I wish they had an edge rusher that I've struck fear into, quarterbacks? Yeah. But they're so good offensively. They're so well coached. I think these little changes around the margins could end up being the difference for them. It's the same thing with the Ravens. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, there weren't problems with this team. I feel the same way about these two teams. We have the big who can actually take down the Chiefs and Eagles conversations.
We have the table in the book. The best ever 5-year period by DVOA since 1978 for a team that has not made the Super Bowl is the last 5 years of the Bills. The second best 5-year period is the last 5 years of the Ravens. The
Bills
Chiefs just keeping everybody out of the game, man.
They're so good. They're such good teams. All right, let's wrap with the Miami Dolphins, who were the oldest team in the NFL last year and have begun to sort of pay the price of some of the contractual decisions that they've made in terms of letting players walk. One of which, they did a swap. I didn't get to talk about the Minka Fitzpatrick side of the Jalen Ramsey because I knew I was going to do the AFC East soon. So I'm excited to get into that. But let's start with the offense, which is mostly the same. There's a few changes here and there. Jonas Savanea coming in at guard. Patrick Paul and Austin Jackson tackle. Darren Waller is part of this very strange tight ends group that no longer has Jonnu Smith. They sign Nick Westbrook-Akine, who is a very competent wide receiver 3. I'll say that. Weird team to talk about last year because the stats are obviously skewed by the fact that Tua didn't play much of the season. When he did play, and I want to start here with you because this is addressed in the almanac too. Had his customary lowest time to throw in the NFL. Don't need to talk about that. 36 in average depth of target using True Media. I think you guys maybe have a slightly different figure, but very, very low.
But basically the same story, right? Yeah. Not
pushing the ball downfield. 5.6 yards. 64% of his yards came from yards after the catch, which was the most in the league. 29% of throws were behind the line of scrimmage. A lot of screens to Achane in this offense. Do you think it's going to be that way again?
They led the league, by the way. In wide receiver screens, they ran the most, and they had a lot of running back screens. They had 7.1 yards per play on running back screens, so it was a good play.
Good play. Achane was great at them. We'll talk about him in a second.
That being said, a team with Tyreek Hill and Jaden Waddle should not be this boring on offense. like it doesn't feel like the excitement is there. Like that's very subjective, but it just doesn't feel like the Dolphins of a couple years ago was like, oh my God, like anything can happen. It was like crazy. The speed is going to be wild. And that went away last year.
Yeah.
And they've got to figure out a way to get that back. And I think going downfield a little bit more would be a big help. And getting better blocking so that Achane can get holes would also be a big help.
Let's talk about that, because that, I think, was maybe the part of this offense that sort of struck me the most when I was looking at the stats last year versus the prior couple of years. 30th in rushing DVOA. 2023, this team was dominant on the ground. First in yards per carry, 6th in success rate, 1st in yards after contact, 7th in yards before per carry, and then all of those numbers pretty much fell off a cliff last year, particularly yards before contact per carry, but because it was actually still getting to decent yards after. But 31st in EPA per play, 28th in yards per carry. Okay, yeah, get the idea. What the hell happened? Like, how much of this is offensive? Because the offensive line was never been, dominant. Obviously, dominant, good. Do you think Mike McDaniel, who was the run game coordinator in San Francisco, hit a bit of a wall? Or do you think some of this was just the way defenses were playing them without Tua, not fearing the downhill passing attack? Like, what went wrong with this run game, and can it be fixed? Do you think it was Achane?
I mean, I don't think it was Achane.
Way more run? Okay.
I don't think it was Achane because his receiving numbers were so good. Like the speed was still there. I will say, if you read the chapter in the FTN Football Almanac, it's pretty clear that Alex Blickel believes that some of this is McDaniel hit a wall. Like, that's kind of the thesis of the chapter. I think some of it was blocking. And some of it, I wish I had run this number beforehand, but I would bet some of it is that the games without Tua, they were really, really not scared of the passing game.
Okay.
And my guess is they faced some pretty heavy boxes in those games, especially. I unfortunately do not have the numbers in front of me, so I'm throwing out a conjecture here rather than
I'm going
to
pull up some of these run numbers with and without Tua while you're talking.
But yeah, like that would seem to be very logical. That even though Tua had the low A dot, like you still had the fear that Tyreek was going to go, and you just didn't with the other quarterback.
But you should be able to. I mean, even with that said, I know things fell off, but Achane is such a good back. I think to me, it's just kind of like another piece of evidence of the whole, how much of this is smoke and mirrors kind of offense, right? Like,
there is a feeling that people have kind of figured out McDaniel. And some of the feeling of that is from the fact that he could not run a good offense with backup quarterbacks. You compare that to something like Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, and what he was able to do to change things with Malik Willis and win games. And Mike McDaniel can't do that if Tua's injured.
Second half of the season, run game was still really bad, still dead last. So
yeah,
this was not just a Tua thing. But as we discussed, Tua wasn't pushing the ball downfield.
Right.
I actually thought Tua himself was not bad last year when he came back from injury. It just kind of, there was no explosivity to the offense, both on the ground, through the air. So you look at this group now, I think it's always hard with the Dolphins, again, like with this offense, because to talk about what the ceiling is and what the potential is. I think the upside case rests on, I'm not going to say Darren Waller, though, great if he was anywhere close to what he was a couple of years ago, but more than 2 years ago. I would say this offensive line reworking is where, if I'm a Dolphins fan and I'm looking for some optimism, they have invested a great deal into this group. They have made draft picks. They have added players. Can it work out? Can the interior in particular, which they've really clearly, when you look at this group, there's a very obvious, okay, we need to get more physical on the inside.
Yes. On both sides of the ball, I'll add that.
Both sides of the ball. We're going to talk about the Kenneth Grant addition in the defense. Aaron Brewer, Savanea. Austin Jackson has been fine at right tackle. Patrick Paul, I think they're, showed a little bit of promise. If they can get that, if that group, I think, outplays what we've seen over the last few years, then you feel a little bit better about where this offense is going, because outside of that, it's largely the same.
Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, better blocking means more holes for Achane. More holes for Achane means Achane does magical things with that speed, and that opens things up for pass. You would hope that opens things up for the pass, and then maybe they can throw it. They got to bring the safety down, and then you can throw it deeper to Tyreek. And a lot, I think, usually I'm a pass to set up the run guy, but I do think that Achane's speed is so dangerous that there is a run to set up the pass here if you can make the run work. So I absolutely agree with you that the interior offensive line is a big part of Miami getting its act together.
All right, let me say something nice about Miami, because I think that was a little bit of a bad vibes conversation. I really like this defensive line. You mentioned this. They drafted Kenneth Grant, who I think gives them both run stopping ability, but also some pass rush juice on the interior next to the, perpetually underrated Zach Sealer. Yep. Chop Robinson was excellent as a rookie, and in the advanced metrics as well, 11th in pass rush win, which favors speed to some degree, I think.
And theoretically is not a starter. Theoretically, that's their third edge rusher.
So they're
he's very good.
Right, him, Phillips. So even if Jalen Phillips comes back and is like, oh, he's not quite who he was, you have depth on that defensive line between him, Bradley Chubb, on the interior, Sealer, and Kenneth Grant. You have Benito Jones. Yeah, I do think losing Calais is actually sneaky a little bit impactful because he continues to be awesome. But let's start there. That's a really good group for them to work with on the front.
Yes, just a quick plug for the 25th quarter century team that Seth Walder and I did, where we put Calais Campbell on the team. He was one of our unexpected people.
Still so good.
The front, he's still so good. He is not aged, like kind of crazy. But you're right. The front, I think the linebackers are reasonable too, and there's depth there. They have KJ Britt now and Willie Gay as backups. The problem here is the secondary. I mean, there's Minka, but Cam Smith, Storm Duck, Cater Cahow.
Yeah, Aaron, I was hoping by the time we taped this, the Dolphins would have signed another corner. I was like,
Stephon Gilmore still available.
Russell Douglas, Gilmore.
Kendall Fuller was there last year, still available.
Yeah, even so, I mean, we're not going to pretend like any of those cornerbacks are dramatically changing this defense, but this, as it stands, is probably the worst corner group in the NFL. I do think the Jalen Minka trade was so fascinating because I think it was much more about both teams just being like sick of these players and saying, he's your problem now. And
why was Pittsburgh sick of Minka? There was a lot of buzz and talk about
a lot of smoke around that, man. Like players kind of alluding to it. I don't know. But I will say this about Minka. I think he's a better fit for the Dolphins defense than the Steelers defense, because the Steelers ran a ton of single high. He was asked to play the post, wasn't really getting his hands on the football. I think in Miami, he's going to play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. I think schematically it makes sense for me that they added him. And safety, of course, with the departure of Javon Holland was a big issue. But it's kind of just like you're unplugging, one hole and filling another, but now you have another hole in the boat kind of situation with this secondary, right? Like, so, okay, cool, we added a safety, but then we lost another corner. It is a tough group.
I mean, they opened 2 holes if you include tight end, right? I mean,
that was weird.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that. The Jalen Minka thing, I was like, all right, whatever. You're kind of net, right? You're even. I understand Johnny wanted more money, but like he's not making much. I didn't really get that because he was so productive in this offense last year. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about how Tua was getting the ball out quickly. And I mean, that was a big part of why his average at the target was down, was Jonnu Smith was such a target monster. So maybe they felt like, no, we want to go back to being a little bit more explosive. But he really took advantage. Jonnu took advantage of the fact that, they were like, okay, cool. You're going to play a bunch of too high and defend our receivers downfield. We now have a player who can get yards after the catch and work underneath. And
and you replaced him with a guy who didn't play last year and like Pharaoh Brown. Like, yeah. So, 2 holes opened up. They filled the safety, but 2 holes opened up.
I I think the optimistic case for this defense really just starts with that pass rush, which I really think could be like one of the, certainly a top 10 pass rush in the league, maybe better. I do like the linebackers, Brooks, Dotson, both former Seattle guys. I think their defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver, is strong. It's just such a weak secondary right now. It's hard to know what to make of these Miami Dolphins. I find them to be one of the more, we've been doing these power rankings pods, and they've kind of consistently landed in the like 18 to 23-ish, 24-ish range league wide. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue talking about this offense because we've just seen the movie play out in January. So I guess if I had to give Dolphins fans some hope, it would be that this young offensive line takes a step forward and you're able to be a little bit more foundationally strong running the football rather than just leaning on the space created by the passing attack.
And this is the opposite of what I said with the Patriots. I feel that this is a team with a very narrow range of possibilities. Unless Tua is injured for almost the entire season, it is really hard imagining that this team's only going to have like 4 or 5 wins. But it's also hard seeing the point where they get to 11.
Zach Wilson, backup quarterback.
Yeah.
Also, just a weird. I wanted them to get like a more Tua-like player because
we talk about the secondary as a weak link system. Their whole cornerback group is weak links. So
yeah. Before we do the final rankings, Mike McDaniel, sneaky hot seat guy.
Yes. Yeah. Because my guess is that the ownership in Miami feels the same stagnation that Alex talks about in the chapter.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know how much to attribute to him versus Tua without even getting into, obviously, the health aspect of this. Even if he was reliably healthy, I think we've just kind of seen that this offense hits a wall that is certainly related to the skills of the quarterback, but also related to the offensive line, but also has the play caller innovated in the, it's kind of hard to disentangle all of these things. I'd say best pick. I hear you on the narrow range of possibilities. I think for this team to exceed expectations, you would need Tyreek Hill to sustain level of play and not decline. Obviously, the age is a factor there. I think the run game has to bounce back with Achane. And then defensively, you'd really have to see that pass rush be so dominant, compensates for a secondary that I just don't think has the potential to be very good.
Yep, that sounds about right. And like I said, I don't think it's a high possibility.
Well, final rankings. Who you got? 1 through 4, AFC East.
I mean, the Bills have the highest win projection in our preseason simulations, and the highest by any team.
Okay. Wow.
Baltimore comes out with the highest projected DVOA, but they have a harder schedule than the Bills have. I will point out that this whole division plays the NFC South, so the schedules are pretty easy across the board. But we have the Bills winning the division more than any other team in the NFL wins their division in our simulations.
Okay, that's the easy one. Bills 1. Got to go 2 through 4.
I'm going to put the Dolphins at 2. I know that that's a surprise. I think if something happens to Allen, it's a lot more likely that the Patriots are 1 than that the Dolphins are 1. But I think the average of the range of possibilities puts the Dolphins a little bit ahead of the Patriots. And then I think the Jets clearly pull up the rear, and I do think that they're mostly playing for next year's quarterback class.
This is a really, really tricky division. I think this is one of the harder ones to do. I'll go Pats over Dolphins for you. Maybe I'm drinking a little bit too much of the Vrabel turnaround Kool-Aid, but...
And I might be a little bit too skeptical of the Vrabel Kool-Aid because the Mayo Kool-Aid tasted so horrible that I may be underrating just how good the Vrabel Kool-Aid really is.
Before we finish today, I want to let you guys know about a couple of things. This podcast is a finalist for the People's Choice podcasts, best female hosted podcast, which, yes, is Lenny Erasure. But you can go sign up to vote for me. I know it's annoying that you have to do these like little signups to vote for podcast awards, but it takes like 2 seconds. I will drop a link to that in the episode notes for this. You can also check out my other podcast with David Dennis Jr., Viewer Discretion, where we talk about TV and movies. This week, we are recapping Superman. Have you seen Superman, Aaron?
I have not yet seen the Superman. I am an old comic book. I'm an old DC guy, so I do think I am going to go see it at some point. I'm somebody who's like, Mr. Terrific, that's great.
He was awesome in the movie, Mr. Terrific. I'm not going to spoil my recap and my review.
I like the actor.
The actor. He is one of the best parts of the movie is Mr. Terrific. And I think if you like the comics, you will like this movie, but let me know. Watch it and get back to me. But that's going to come out on Thursday morning. So you can check youtube.com/IMinaKimes or subscribe. Just look up Viewer Discretion or my name. We're going to do a couple movies before getting back to TV. We're mixing things up there. Aaron, can you remind folks once again where to get the FTN Almanac?
Absolutely. ftnfantasy.com/almanac. For the FTN Football Almanac 2025, Jalen Carter is on the cover. The site may be called FTN Fantasy, and there are fantasy projections in the book from Jeff Radcliffe, award-winning fantasy projections. But a reminder, we're all about everything. We're all about just how good our teams and projection for this year and just what happened last year and what's going to happen this year, plus jokes. All the writers that you know from the old Football Outsiders Almanac days, ftnfantasy.com/almanac, or look for it on Amazon.
I would also throw out a recommendation for FTN's Stat Hub page, which I started using last year. Excellent stuff. A lot of stats you can't get anywhere else. Really easy to use and really, again, very useful for both analyzing football, but also other aspects of the game. That's it for this week. Going to be back next week with Jordan Rodrigue to preview the NFC West. This has been the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, brought to you by myself, but also by the fine folks at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, and Tucker Tashjian. See you guys next week.